Also, just a note to everybody, good morning. Good to be with you virtually. I just want to make sure that you know there will be times throughout the day that we will ask you to turn on your camera and unmute to share your thoughts. And so just don't be surprised when we do that. And in fact, we will be doing small groups right away this morning. So we want to make sure you're ready for it. Next slide. So this is our fall Adult Education Managers Meeting. Welcome, everybody. It's good to be with you all. Today is Tuesday, November 16th. We have a couple things that we want to share with you today. So let's go to the agenda slide. We will have welcome. Then we're going to take some time to talk about programming models. Then we will also talk about recruitment and marketing, then transitions, grants and accountability. We'll talk about our high C's, the high school equivalency assessments, and close out with some professional development updates. Let's start with some introductions from our adult education team at the Minnesota Department of Education. My name is Brad Haskamp. I'm the State Adult Education Director. Good to see you all.
Good morning, everyone. I am Jody Versa. I am the Program Quality Specialist on the team. And like Brad said, yeah, it's great to be virtually gathered here with you this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Danko. I'm the Adult Basic Education Transition Specialist, and I'm glad to see everyone here.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you today, and I look forward to the day when we can be back together in person. My name is Astrid Leiden, and I'm the Professional Development Specialist on our team.
Hello, I'm Neil Allard. I am Communications and Administrative Support on the MDE team.
Thanks to the whole team for being with us today and helping to plan today's event. We do have two team members that are also not with us in this session, but working hard on many other things. Alice Smith, who many, if not all of you know, are GED records specialist and administrative support, and Lena Zhao, our grants specialist. And so we really are thankful for Alice's and Lena's support for our team as well. And we are planning another position to be posted yet within the next couple of weeks or within the next month. So fingers crossed we get to add to our team before at the end of this year, which is really exciting. So as we get started this morning, I wanted to reiterate some of the direction that we kind of have for this year ahead. And we shared this at Summer Institute, and I think it's great that we kind of reflect on this and remind ourselves of our direction this year. And that is that we're exploring the great unknown together. And we acknowledge that the path forward is not clear where we're going to be as of June or July in 2022. We're not quite sure what that will look like, but we're going to work through that together. And we know that many of you are making those decisions on your own, and you're making a lot of individual decisions, but it's affirming and it's helpful that when we get together like this or talk together, and we know that we can get further together or have some reassurance when we're working together and collaborating, sharing resources, ideas, and issues along the way. Along with that, on the next slide, some of the ways that we're going to do that, we've seen you experimenting and building sustainable, successful models that include in-person, hybrid, high flex, and distance education. We see you sharing with each other in a wonderful way. Adult education has always been really affirming that we share, and that's been the way that we operate very much so, and that's excellent. And also, though, keeping the primary focus on our learners, not just our current learners, but also our potential learners, trying to increase our recruitment and persistence, incorporating an equity lens and the learner voice in analyzing and deciding what we offer and how we do our work. Let's go to the next slide because I really want to open it up to some of our colleagues. So a great way to get started today is to work with Literacy Action Network. I thought it'd be wonderful to have Susan C. and I to have a little bit of a conversation. But before we talk, before we kind of answer some questions, I'd really like to open it up to Susan and C to introduce themselves.
All right, well, I'll go first. And I'm Susan Wettenkamp-Brandt, and I'm the president of Literacy Action Network. And I would really like to thank Brad for inviting C and I today. I was surprised to get his invitation, but really pleased and glad to be here. And I would also just like to note that my term as president is up at the end of 2021. And so C. Mualeski, who will be introducing herself in a second, will be stepping into this role. And I have all the confidence that she will be a great leader for Literacy Action Network and for the adult basic education field as a whole. So say hello, C.
Hey everyone, C. Mualeski here. I am the program manager for Southwest ABE down in Marshall. And as Susan mentioned, I will be taking over in January. So hopefully things don't fall apart when I take over.
Never.
So let's go to the next slide. And the three of us are going to reflect on some questions. And our first question is, what are some of the ways that we see programs focusing on learners, experimenting with new programs and models, and working together? Susan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So in addition to my role at LAN, my day job is working with technology, as I think most of you know. And so I think I have that particular perspective on things. And one of the things that I think is really taking off and getting rolling at a lot of programs is the HighFlex model, where some students are able to attend a class in person and other students are coming online and they're mingling together, and students can opt in to online or in person depending on what their needs are. I think that's got a lot of potential. I mean, like, as a teacher, it's kind of intimidating. Like if I were going to do that, I'm like, oh, I don't know how that's going to go. Like, I think it would be really hard. But the idea that, you know, students can choose the mode of learning that works best for them at the time is really exciting. You know, our students have really complicated lives, and we know that persistence is an issue. It's been an issue as long as I've worked in ABE, and that's getting on towards 20 years now. And I think if we can keep people engaged, like, okay, your car broke down, or you don't have childcare today, or your kid is sick and you can't come to the building, you can stay engaged from home on your device, like, and not have to lose your progress and lose the connection to your class and your teacher and your classmates, then maybe you can improve persistence. And so I think it's got a lot of promise. And then the other thing that I think people are experimenting with this year is the teacher verification model for asynchronous instruction. And people are trying out different ways of using teacher created lessons to support students so that they don't have to rely just on sort of prepackaged curriculum, but they can customize and they can make things that really fit the class that they're teaching. So I think that's another way that people are trying to adapt to the specific needs that they see in their students. So I think that's a really exciting time on those fronts.
Yeah, and then just adding on to Susan, you know, with the additional funds that were allocated us from the governor, I'm sure a lot of those people were able to use that money and in all the ways that Susan had mentioned, as well as, you know, I can speak from what's going on here, and I've been able to be part of the exciting regional EL model class that we are offering to our students in the evenings, where we are able to offer levels. Down here in rural area, we usually don't have a lot of high enrollment, and so we are usually a one-room schoolhouse. This is a way for us to all combine our resources and kind of provide opportunity for our students to actually get leveled learning. So that's been really exciting. Classes have been going really well. We you know, this is a pilot, so if it goes really well, we are going to look at doing it next year. So it's super exciting. And then I just want to note really quickly that with everything being online, we were back and forth with Summer Institute. So due to the dates that we weren't able to get for the conference center in St. Cloud, it will be virtual this year. And so hopefully next year, which is what, 2023, we'll be back in person and we'll get to see everybody's faces again. So.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks, C. And yeah, see, you bring up a good point with, you know, as we think about 2022, we already have to lay those plans now, whether it's with planning future conferences or events, or whether it's how we're going to use those ARP Act funds, those federal additional ABE dollars, to really invest in kind of the future of our programming. That's really important. You know, what some of the other things that I'm seeing are just new integrated education and training classes and programs that are opening up throughout the state, or that have been open and persist through this time. Like some of the work that was done in Sauk Rapids with the statewide IET program. In DOC, Julia Dinkow and I just met with DOC, Department of Corrections, to talk about cabling specialists, cabling tech, IET, an IET pathway that they're creating there. They're doing so, we see programs really innovating and thinking about what are the students, what are our learners asking for? What programming can we offer that really focuses on what will benefit learners now and in the future based on their needs and their goals. And that how we invest those additional ABE dollars is really key right now, and will help us kind of determine where we go from here. Absolutely. So let's go to the next question. So this we're already kind of talking about this, but could you talk a little bit more about what are you seeing in the field right now? And how do you see people in adult education supporting one another?
So I know with our transitions group, we usually normally meet quarterly, but we have decided to also meet monthly. And this has really helped because we're able to bounce off ideas off each other, provide support for each other outside of transitions. And that has led us to, start that EL regional class, and also kind of talk about any frustrations or things we have, dealing with how to support our staff and our teachers being burned out. What can we do to support them? So that has really helped a lot. And I think just finding somebody that you can talk to maybe outside of ABE, just to kind of have that support. And, we talked a lot about self-care, make sure you have self-care. What does it look like to you? Make sure that you are practicing self-care, and that don't feel guilty about it, because you can't help somebody if you're not helping yourself.
Yeah.
So what about you? What are you seeing?
Well, I think we're all very well aware that teacher burnout across the education spectrum, from preschool all the way up through higher ed, is a real issue right now. And I think there are multiple stressors on people, right? So if you're back in person, okay, maybe you're not having that stressor of dealing with so much technology and staring at a screen all the time, but then maybe there's a COVID, scare at your building and you have to go get tested, and that's an additional stressor. But if you're not teaching in a building and you're maybe able to avoid that stress, you have the stress of, do I know how to navigate all this technology, and do my students know how to do that, and can we teach efficiently? And so there's stressors no matter what model you're in, or maybe you're trying to do high flex and that's completely new and you don't know how to do it, and we're all innovating all the time, and that gets really exhausting after a while, right? I think everybody is really feeling like, their bucket is empty, right? And I think that's why C's comments about how are we building each other up and connecting with each other and taking self-care is so important, because we can't be our best selves at work for our students if we're tapped out and feeling at the end of our rope. So I think we really do need to make sure we're checking in with our staff, we're listening to what they're saying, and feeling like they have a chance to be heard and know that we care about them as not just employees, but as people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that it's true. That level of exhaustion and just fatigue across our field across all educators, especially our teachers, is really pronounced right now. And I agree, exploring what does our individual and collective support network look like, and how are we supporting one another is so important. Some things I've also seen is I've seen some programs starting to think, because there's so much innovating and because high flex takes a lot more planning, programs are re-examining how much prep time to allocate to teachers, maybe increasing that. I also have seen, and we at the Department of Education have done this, even when there's virtual PD happening, is there a way that we can convene as a group, as a team, or just a couple of us get together in person to participate in that virtual PD, because then you can kind of have like process that a little bit together. There's some kind of just comfort in being together, even if you're participating in virtual PD, about talking through that and being able to work together on that. So I've seen some other programs that do that as well, that even when there's virtual PD, they might get together physically to participate in that, which is excellent. But how you support one another kind of depends, and it depends on the individual, like you were saying, see, like what one person wants isn't necessarily what the other person wants, and what's comforting for one might be stressful for another. So it's something we need to collectively do and continue to do. Absolutely. Well, that was just very short, and I wish we had another 20 minutes where we could really talk through that a lot more. But Susan, I really thank you for all of your wonderful work as Literacy Action Network president. You've really taken on this role and owned this role, and you've been such a strong leader, not only for Literacy Action Network, but for the field. So I really want to thank you for your service. And wow, what a legacy you leave over these past 2 years, right? Like not what you thought you were stepping into, but wow,
definitely not what I thought I was signing up for in November of 2019. I was joking with Brad and C the other day. It's like I started, 2020, January 2020 with my term. We're going to have a board retreat, which I couldn't even go to because I was double booked for a training that day in person. And so then I got to run one land board meeting, February of 2020, in sort of the normal times, and then everything went sideways. It's been quite the ride.
Absolutely.
It's been a privilege to try to lead in this time, and I've given it my best shot. I don't know if I got it right all the time, but I sure tried. And I know that C is going to lead us into the future. I have full confidence that she's going to be a great land president for the next
year. Thank you, Susan. And yes, C, I'm really excited for you to step into this role as well and make it your own and continue this great legacy for Literacy Action Network and for our field. So thank you very much, and I'm excited to work with you over the next couple of years ahead. So as we go forward, let's go to the next slide. And now we want to turn the conversation over to each of you. So we're going to give each group 10 minutes in small groups to really talk about what your biggest challenges, what successes are you experiencing, and what's working to lift your morale and your staff's morale. So Carla, are we ready to go into small groups?
Yes, I've got it already.
Excellent. And if anyone has any needs or needs any help, just click on that request help or we need help button at the bottom of the screen, and someone can come in there to help your group out or answer any questions. But we hope that this is time for you just to talk together. So let's launch those groups. Views with each other, but thank you all. And I hope that was valuable to have at least a little bit of time to connect with one another. I think we still have, Carla, is everybody back now, or are there still some people in groups?
No, the rooms have closed.
Oh, excellent. Wonderful. Okay, then let's go to the next slide. I want to just share quickly one of the challenges that we at MDE have, and that is that we're moving. As of December 3rd, longer have any access to the building in Roseville. And we will be moving to Northeast Minneapolis. And you can see the address on the screen, 400 Northeast Stinson Boulevard. And just one other thing to know, we do not know yet when we will have access to the new building, but we will not have access on December 3rd or December 4th to the new building. It could be anywhere from maybe January to June where we have access to the new building. So we're kind of still learning what that process will look like, and we'll share as we can. But just note that we will no longer be in that Roseville building next month. Then one other thing I wanted to share on the next slide. I also wanted to remind everyone of our team. This is our Minnesota Adult Education Teams Equity Statement, and it is here on the screen. And it really shares our commitment to creating educational equity. And we have stated this before, but I wanted to briefly share one way that we are putting this, our team is putting this commitment to equity in action. And that is with a new supplement. One way that we're doing this is with a new supplemental service grant that we issued this year to promote and focus on racial equity in adult education. And Southwest Minnesota ABE has won that grant, and they are taking the lead in that work. And C is taking in that work. C, do you want to just briefly share your one request that you have for the field on what you're doing going forward?
Yes, so as outlined in the grant, I need to complete a data analysis. And so that would require some participation from the rest of the state here. So we're working with Rose Chu, and we are creating some surveys and some focus groups. So if the next month or so something comes out, if you all can complete the survey and send it out to your staff and don't delete it or ignore it, because we need it so that we can complete this and figure out if there's any inequities in our state ABE system. So I really greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, C. And this is really important to help us with that analysis of our statewide system. So thank you so much, C, for taking the lead on that. Just want to remind folks, as we're back from the small groups, if you still have your video on, you can click to stop your video, and then we'll keep going forward. And then at this point, I am going to turn it over to Jody and to Astrid.
Thank you, Brad. And that was a great kickoff to our meeting, hearing from our various state leaders and having the opportunity to connect with others around the state around the challenges and successes you're experiencing and how you've been supporting each other and your staff. We want to continue in that vein to dig in a little bit and hear some more about the program models that are being used around the state. There's a lot of experimentation going on and a lot of difficult decisions, and we want to get a chance to hear about how those decisions are being made. So let's go to the next slide. We are going to start with just a quick poll to get a sense of where things are at the moment around the state in terms of programming. So Carla, if you could please launch our poll, and we'll give you just a minute to respond. You have the opportunity to check all that apply around what types of instruction is currently being provided in your program. Give you another 30 seconds. Great. It looks like we have the majority of our participants having responded. And if Carla, you can please show the results. And as Teresa notes in the chat, we know that, yes, we've got programs that have multiple people here. So this is definitely not a scientific poll. But as you can see from these results, we do have majority of programs represented here providing some in-person programming, many still offering synchronous online live remote instruction, and a majority offering some sort of asynchronous instruction via distance education platforms. And then a smaller percentage doing asynchronous instruction via teacher-created courses and TBM lessons, but still about a quarter of folks here today. And then over 38% doing some form of high flex. As Susan mentioned earlier, that is a model that is really taking off, and we've got many consortia that are experimenting with that model. So we can stop sharing. Good to kind of take the temperature and see what's happening around the state in different programs. Let's go to the next slide. At this point, we want to hear directly from a couple of programs about how they have made decisions about the delivery models that they're using this fall. Last week, Atlas offered the second in the series of administrator-specific webinars. And that webinar was specifically focused on delivery models. We were really excited about the information that was shared, and there were really not very many people in attendance. So we wanted to bring that information to the bigger group here today. So we've invited the two panelists, Karen Walters from Mankato ABE and Renata Romanes from St. Paul Hub Center, to share a little bit about how they've been making decisions about which delivery models to use this fall. So we're going to start with Karen. Karen, I'll turn things over to you. And as you listen to Karen, Renata, I encourage you to put any questions that you have for them in the chat. And then hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes when they've both finished for them to take a couple of questions. So I'll turn things over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Astrid. Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Walters. I work at Mankato Adult Basic Education as the program manager there. Mankato ABE is a middle-sized consortium in Southwest Minnesota. We serve 6 school districts. We have typically 850 students a year and typically around 70,000 contact hours a year, just to give you a little idea of what we look like. Next slide. So the question that we had talked about at that last meeting was, how do we make these decisions? What's the process for making the decisions? And I just, like to start always with data. So in our program, we collect a lot of data, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. And as we're collecting data and looking at the data, we like to talk to people a lot, talk about the data. What does it look like? What does it mean? Analyze it. And that could be in our formal ABE leadership meetings. That could be just with partners. I like to get input from all the stakeholders and just talk about what's happening and what they see happening. Through that talk and discussion and data collection, we usually come up with some type of a plan and kind of run it by people and then formalize that, and we get going. We don't sit and analyze forever and get frozen. We just get going, because the best thing to do is to pilot things, make mistakes, and fix it. So we've done that now since the beginning of COVID, and even prior to COVID, we kind of operated that way. We make adjustments and we tweak and we just keep making it better. So next slide. This is some of the data and the factors that we considered when we were deciding on our learning models for this year. We were looking at data prior to COVID and then post that COVID year. So we're looking at our daytime was in person, and that was the best. The best attendance was daytime in person, and the best attendance in evening was online during COVID. So we had always struggled with our evening programming and trying to figure out what could we do to increase that. And when it switched to online, it really picked up. So we also had been surveying our students. A lot of our students that we were surveying during COVID were already online, and it was working for them. So we were considering that of course the people who are online and it's working for them are going to say, yeah, keep the online going. But we also had people calling in and saying, I can't come back until you have childcare for me. I need flexibility for my job. Could I come to a school some days and then be online? So we know our students needed a variety of things and a lot of flexibility. We had surveyed our staff throughout COVID multiple times. Of course, our staff prefer in-person, and most people do. But we did see our students saying there was a great need for online learning, even after the pandemic. As a budgeter and staffing person, I'm always thinking, like we can't offer everything online and in person, just like we can't offer everything we have at all times of the day. It's just not in the money. We just don't have the funding to do that. So we really have to think about what can we do to make things flexible, but yet stay within budget. Our school district had a lot of the the decisions in our school district had a lot of weight in our thinking, because in our decision making, because back when COVID hit and we started that school year online, our students chose to put their kids in online instead of face-to-face. A lot of our ESL students were very scared. And so then that meant they had to be home. So even if we wanted to have face-to-face learning last year, it wouldn't have worked, because our K-12 kids a lot of them were choosing to be home for our ESL families. So we ended up being in online all of last year. This year, the district, we came out of that emergency order, and the district went back to in-person learning. So then that helped us know that we could offer face-to-face during the day. And then we have staffing. So like thinking about our HighFlex and some of the newer technology that we're trying, we really need to pick teachers that have confidence with that technology. And we picked platforms that our district would support. And then we knew that we needed to have support for our learners and our staff if we were going to continue to use distance learning as a plan. Next slide. Some of the must-dos, these are the things that we all agreed in our ABE leadership team that must happen regardless of what platforms, what we're doing for mode, is that we decided to have a learner management system in every course. So face-to-face courses still use a learner management system, online and HighFlex. It just makes it easier for all people to access the materials if there's a place to go that is virtual. It also makes it easier to switch modes. So if something would happen and we had to switch to distance learning, even for a few weeks, we would have everything already in a learner management system, and it would be easier. Also, our curriculum is archived that way. And we didn't really think about that when we first started using Google Classroom, but at the end of the year, it was like, well, here we have all these classes with all the curriculum already laid out. If we have a switch in staff, they have something to go back and look at. Everything's aligned and ready. We knew we need to use state standards. That's like for sure in every class, regardless of mode. We decided this year that our teachers would teach distance learning skills in every class. So they're mostly applying that using the North Star standards. We felt like teachers need to keep using technology with students and to keep their own skills up, but also to make sure our students are ready. Our students need to be able to apply those skills. And we do put it as part of our evaluation process for our teachers to be observing teaching distance learning digital literacy skills. And then we have to adhere to policies. Obviously, there's no more COVID exceptions. So pre-testing, post-testing, following all the policies that were in place prior to COVID and now are back. Next slide. So some of the conclusions we came to was that our daytime classes would be in person with some HighFlex options, and we're piloting those now. We have level 6 ESL, our on-ramp, which is level 5 and up, and then our citizenship and some math classes are HighFlex right now. They have been since the beginning of the school year. We have daycare going, so that students who want to come in person have that available. And then our evening is actually a regional evening program. So there are 5 ABE programs with the 7 managers that we work with in our transitions group. We are all piloting together a regional evening online ESL program with 5 different levels. It has about 75 school districts involved, and our RTC person has been hired as well on the side to help us with that. She works for Mankato. She's on the call, Mary Kate Lewis. And then our GED classes are in person, and we have some distance learning platform options available for them. And then for our IET and transitions levels, we have a lot of hybrid. If they are a transitions funded course, they're completely online because they're regional and everybody needs to be able to access those. So that's how we came to the decisions in Mankato.
Thank you so much, Karen. That is really helpful to hear about your process and how things are going. Let's hear now from Renata Ratmanis from the St. Paul Hub Center.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Renata. I'm the supervisor here at the Hub Center in St. Paul. Next slide. So we started out just kind of figuring out what our goals were going to be as we've, adjusted to the new normal. The number one goal was always to meet learner needs. And of course, that's important for everybody. It's also important for goal 2, which is generating contact hours. If you're not meeting their needs, then they won't come, and then you don't get the contact hours. So those two kind of went together. And even though those hours are not mattering for funding for this year, we still wanted to keep that in mind because we know at some point that they will. So we also needed to think about contractual obligations. So we are part of the St. Paul Public Schools district. Our teachers are under that teaching contract. And so there are some things around like high flex that are currently being negotiated with the union. And so we had to keep that in mind also just in terms of like synchronous hours, how many hours people could teach, that sort of thing, what we could ask of them. And then we wanted to maintain really the most flexibility in programming. And I think that has always been true in ABE, but like the last 18 months or so has really shown just how much flexibility you need to have. And so we were looking at, ways that we could be prepared for whatever might come next. Next slide. So kind of our evolution, we started with a student survey, and I have results from that in a little bit. Again, going back to the idea that the learning models would have to meet those student needs. So if students weren't going to come in person, then we really shouldn't offer too much in person. And so starting with that, and then looking at where we could duplicate. So if there were some classes that we could offer both in person and online, we did that because that seemed like an easy answer. In some cases, in order to do that, we had to make changes to what we were offering. So for example, our ELL classes used to be broken up into 6 levels. That seemed like a lot to duplicate, having 6 in person and 6 online. So we actually changed the score ranges to be 4 levels. And so each of those classes is a little bit more multi-level, but we are able to offer, for the most part, both in person and online at the same time that way. And then similar to what Karen was saying, we had to experiment and adjust. At some point, you have some data, you never have all the data. And certainly this is a very hard time to predict what's going to happen and where students are going to be. So we just kind of dove in with some things and knew that we would keep evaluating and changing as we went. So the student survey was asking if they wanted to stay online, and also similar to what Karen said, a lot of the response came from students who were successfully coming online. And so we kept that in mind as we were looking at the results. Overall, about 75% of the students, and we did the survey in the spring, about 75% of our current students wanted to stay online in the future. And that was pretty across the board. We did survey past students who were no longer coming, but the response rate was really, really low because I think those were the students who weren't successful during the worst of COVID. So overall, about 75% wanted to stay online. It was a little bit lower for math. I think math students really like that face-to-face. They get stuck a little bit easier. And so they had a little bit of a higher preference for in-person. And then on the other end, our college pathways and our evening classes, those students, more than 80% wanted to be online. And that kind of made sense. I mean, at that college level, I think those students have a lot of skills and they're looking to be ready for college, which also requires a lot of online skill. And our evening students were really finding a lot of success being able to stay home. They didn't need a babysitter. They didn't need extra time between, work and coming here and going home and all of that. They could just be home and be online. And when they were done, they were just done and they were already home. And that's worked out well for them. And so for the most part, they said they wanted to stay that way. And then when we looked at what we could duplicate, again, like a lot of the ELL classes we could, as long as we kind of condense some of those levels. We have several communication classes that we were able to duplicate. Some levels of the college prep we did, the lower level, we ended up duplicating in person, and we got enough students for that. Some levels of the math we are able to do both online and in person. And then just looking at certain times of the day. So in the morning, we have a lot of students. So we are able to offer in-person and online at the same time. Same thing in the evening. The in-person is kind of small, but we have it. And then we have online. Afternoon, not enough students. So afternoon is only online because we really can't duplicate. There's just not going to be enough students. So as we kind of dived in spring of 2021, we had some more options of what we could do with our building. And so we did bring some students back for in-person. That took a lot of time for them to get back. They were not pounding at the door to get in by any means. So that was a slow return, but we are glad to have started that. And then we started to experiment with HyFlex in the spring, mostly because we had one teacher who was really, really interested in doing it. And she took on all the work and really set it up and got that going. Summer 2021, we just kind of increased those in-person offerings, but also kept a lot of online classes. So just kind of kept adjusting as we went. And last slide. So this kind of lays out all of the different models that we are doing in St. Paul and a little bit of the reasoning behind it. And I'll just go quickly because I've talked about some of these already, but in person, obviously we want to offer in person for those students who really benefit from that and who aren't able to access online. So we do have in person morning and evening at Hub Center. We have it for ELL, math, GED, college prep. And really we're able to offer in person when we have enough students to fill those classes. And we really want to offer that because there are some students who don't have the technical skills to be online. And not only do we want them in class learning, English or math or GED, but we also want them in class learning digital literacy so that if they need to go online at some point in the future, they are able to do that. Online synchronous classes, we have morning, afternoon, and evening for just about, almost every class we offer is offered online at some point. Some of these were duplicated of the in-person, and some of them are only offered online. When in doubt, if we could only offer a class one way, so either in person or online, we went with online because it seemed like that could meet more of the student needs that way. We do have some HyFlex. We are doing that mostly in the morning and on Fridays. We have a couple of ELL HyFlex classes, and those are specifically at a smaller site. And we were worried that the smaller site maybe wouldn't have enough students to really keep it going if some of those students went online and then only some of those students were coming in person. So we made that site, basically the entire site is a HyFlex site. And so that's been working well, that we've been able to maintain that as a location for those in-person students, but then also serving online at the same time. We also have one GED HyFlex class on a Friday, which is a time when it's hard to get students to come. GED classes are hard to get students to come, but that class is actually done really well. It's one of our biggest GED classes that we offer. And then we also did HyFlex with our small business job training class. And so that was another one where we couldn't possibly offer that one both in person and online. So we would normally just do it online, but the teacher was interested in doing HyFlex. And so that kind of opened it up to some additional audiences. And so that's been good as well. So again, those HyFlex classes were kind of aimed at those smaller locations and some of those classes that are maybe a little bit harder to fill, plus willing teachers. So all of those teachers were ones who were interested in piloting HyFlex. And I do think most of them have found that they like it, that it's easier than what they thought. But it's a learning curve. So I was glad to have those teachers that were willing to do it. We have some hybrid classes. Those are mostly our job training classes, and that's where most of the instruction is online. But maybe the first week of class is in person to really get students oriented to the expectations. And then maybe towards the end, there's some in-person for some skills training. So something like a nursing assistant, you can do a lot of that instruction online. And then it's really nice to have students come in person to actually practice blood pressure and patient transfer and all of those things. Same thing with our building maintenance class, mostly online, but the OSHA 10 training is in person because that's what OSHA is requiring right now. And our final model, we call it coaching, but it's for students who are only doing distance learning platforms. So they don't have any synchronous instruction, but they are still assigned to a coach who checks in with them regularly, assigns stuff in the platforms, gives feedback on how the student is doing, problem solves, might help them with a particular problem that they are having in there. If they just don't understand it, they might hop on a really quick Google Meet and do that. But it keeps students engaged who aren't able to come to a synchronous class. And so, we're hoping that maybe at some point they are able to come to synchronous, because I do think that is a more valuable way to learn for most of the students, but this is a way to not lose them in the meantime. And I think that's it for me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Renata. I love that grid outlining the various options and rationale for the different options. For the sake of time, I'm going to direct people to the chat for any follow-up questions you have for Karen and Renata. Karen and Renata, if you are willing to take questions after the webinar, if you wouldn't mind putting in your email addresses, that would be wonderful. We really, really appreciate you sharing today. Karen has already responded to a couple of questions about what she shared in the chat. And then we have a number of questions that I think are ones that we'd love to have people all over the state respond to. A question about experience with online CASAS testing, how that's going. Someone else asked about survey tools and strategies for surveying students. So if you have tools that you like, if you could pop those in the chat. And then a question from Chelsea about HighFlex and whether HighFlex programs are requiring students to choose one learning mode or another. So let's keep the conversation going in the chat. I'd like to turn it back over to Jody at this point to get some feedback and input from other programs as well.
All right, thank you, Astrid. So yeah, thank you so much to Karen and Renata for sharing some of the nitty-gritty of what's happening in your programs. We were hopeful that we were going to have a little bit more time for discussion at this point, and I think we won't take too much time, but we did just want to put out some general questions to the group for you to think about. What delivery models are you using, how you made those decisions, what's been successful and challenging. So if you'd like to share anything about that in the chat, please go ahead and do so. And we did just want to pause for a moment and acknowledge that Mankato and St. Paul are two of our larger ABE programs across the state. And we know our system looks very different in different communities and different locations across Minnesota. So we did just want to pause for a second and invite, if there is a manager here today who represents a smaller program or a very rural program, more of a one-room schoolhouse type model. If anyone in that kind of a scenario has some thoughts and answers to these particular questions, we would invite you to raise your hand, and we'd like to hear from you to balance out some of the voices we've already heard. So go ahead and think about that and continue the dialogue that's happening in the chat. Oh, looks like Tracy has her hand up. That would be great to hear from you, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. In Northfield, we have a one-room schoolhouse for our ESL students in the evenings. And we increased our programming to 3 days a week because students were really excited to come back. Our teacher, Mary Jo Kukacha, some of you might know her, she has done a phenomenal job of making this group feel like a tight-knit family. The class is pretty large for us. It's can range between 15 and 25 students a night. And the consistency of the attendance is remarkable. We offer bus tokens for students who can't get there. We have a partnership with a farm that buses their hired help to class 3 nights a week. We have a partnership with the food shelf that's in the building so that they can accommodate our class schedule and get food to students. And then we have a partnership with St. Olaf so that the cafeteria there brings leftover meals and fresh meals, but things from the day to the students as well. So it's worked out really well, but I think the key to holding it all together has been the way that the students come together and support one another. It is a multi-level class from level 1 all the way up, and it's amazing how it works. But to be in there and to see it working as well as it does with one teacher and sometimes 2 volunteers is really encouraging. So we don't have the staff to offer online and in person. It would be great if we did, but we're making it work with the small amount of staff that we have this year in meeting the needs of our students.
So much, Tracy. That's a really actually helpful and encouraging to hear about what it looks like in Northfield, because yeah, that is a very different setting than either Mankato or Hub Center, where it's not a big building with lots of classroom and lots of classrooms and lots of staff. So thank you so much, Tracy. That is a really helpful addition. So if anybody has questions for Tracy or anybody else that's shared or for each other, I see a lot of activity in the chat, so thank you. I think, Tracy, that's really interesting what you mentioned about how important it is that the students are supporting each other. And I also feel that that is very true of our statewide adult education system. And I really appreciate how you all are sharing with each other and asking questions of each other. And I just really appreciate this community of practice that we have developed and how we are learning and growing through all of these hard questions together. So thank you to all of you. I think we're going to keep going here. On the next slide, I think we won't take too much time for this, but if you'd like to do this over the break time, we invite you to. So at the presentation last week that was organized by Atlas, where Karen and Renata originally shared this information, the Atlas folks put together a Padlet as a tool to get some response to those presentations and get people to share some more thoughts and ideas. As Atlas is planning for more administrator-focused professional development in the upcoming year, they're interested in hearing from you all about what questions you still have, what other topics you'd like more information about, kind of what resonates and what you might be thinking of trying. So Astrid, could you put the link to the Padlet in the chat? And we invite any of you to take some time to go visit that Padlet and add your thoughts and your ideas to this particular discussion around programming models and how to make decisions about programming models and other related topics that you'd like to see more professional development about this year. So at this point, slightly later than we planned, but not too much, we are going to take a break. So we will take 10 minutes and I think, yep, go ahead, Neil, and hit.
Could you please start our recording? Great. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed your break. I don't know about you, but my coffee didn't look like that, unfortunately. And just looking ahead, we will have another break around 11:30. So let's go to the next slide. In wrapping up our conversation around program models, we wanted to share some various supports that are available to you as you are making decisions and experimenting with various ways of delivering instruction. So let's go to the next slide. There's been a lot of interesting chat going on in our chat box about HighFlex as a new delivery model. I wanted to remind folks again that we do have a new HighFlex community of practice group that's being facilitated by members of our statewide distance learning team. This is an opportunity to get together informally and share with other programs that are experimenting with HighFlex instruction. The meetings are in Google Meet. They're open to both teachers and managers. The next meeting is this afternoon at 2:30. So this is open to everybody. Encourage you to hop in, and there'll be an opportunity to share resources and experience a little show and tell from teachers using HighFlex. So thank you so much to the Literacy Minnesota Distance Learning and Technology Supplemental Service Grant for supporting that work. Encourage people to get involved and learn more. Let's go to the next slide. Also wanted to remind folks that we do have ongoing opportunities for teachers to get certified to use the teacher verification model, which is a way of providing asynchronous instruction, teacher created lessons, and counting proxy hours for that, those completed lessons. We have some upcoming certification webinars, one in early December, one in February. The links to those webinars are in the Distance and Blended Learning Basics for Minnesota Adult Education online course. So in order to become TVM certified, you need to complete that course, including the TVM module, and then participate in a teacher verification model certification webinar and have an approved TVM sample lesson. So Jody's put some information in the chat about how you can learn more about the process and take a look at a Q&A about TVM and the support email for any TVM or distance learning related topic. I see your question, Penny, in the chat about a place where the TVM approved materials are going to be located. We don't currently have a statewide repository of TVM lessons. That is something that's being discussed, and would encourage you, if you have thoughts about what you'd like that to look like, to put those in the chat. So let's go to the next slide here. We know that many students are still struggling with either devices or internet access or the digital literacy skills that they need to be able to participate effectively in. And I want to let folks know that there are both statewide resources housed on the Literacy Minnesota website, as well as national resources for digital navigators. So these are excellent resources that you can use to set up digital navigation support in your program. And then finally, we want to get some input from you. The distance learning team is looking for your feedback on what distance learning and technology support, resources, and training would help you run your programs more effectively and efficiently. We know that we are having some difficulty recruiting people to participate in longer term PD cohorts right now. So the distance learning team is rethinking some of the professional development plans for this year and really want to hear directly from you about what would be most useful. So I'd like to encourage you to put your suggestions in the chat. What resources do you need? What training would help you in the area of distance learning and technology support? And this would also be a place if you're looking for more support around TVM lessons. If you have some ideas about what you'd like to see in that area, please share those ideas in the chat as well. I'm going to turn it over to Jody to talk a little bit about recruitment and marketing.
All right, thanks, Astrid. So we know that connected to all these questions around program models, there's also the question of, are students coming and how do we get them to know about the different programming that we have available, and how do we find more and new students who could benefit from these new and improved models of programming that you all are working really hard to implement right now. So we wanted to spend just a little bit of time thinking about that issue and sharing a few resources with you, and kind of, again, continuing this conversation of sharing amongst our community here. So on the next slide, kind of wanted to start with a couple of questions. And I think for the sake of time, we'll just ask you if you have any thoughts about these questions to go ahead and pop those in the chat. But we just encourage you to think about what marketing and recruitment strategies are you using currently? And importantly, how have those practices changed because of the pandemic? We know that we are in a new world, and we know that many of you have been thinking strategically and creatively about how to get the word out about your programming. And we hope that those are things that anyone who has landed on anything interesting or anything that feels productive or promising, that you would go ahead and put that in the chat and share with other folks. So as you're doing that, and as you're thinking about that, we're going to keep going and share a couple of resources for you in this area. One thing, if you are a person in your program currently actively thinking about recruiting and marketing, you may want to check out this presentation that was made by Kaya from Neighborhood House and Matt from Metro North at the Fall 2021 conference a couple of weeks ago. The presentation was on marketing and student recruitment strategies and resources. There's a link to the recording here, and I see Astrid has put that in the chat. So some of the content of that was about planning for recruitment, and then both digital outreach tools and more sort of traditional in-person recruitment strategies. So we encourage you to take a listen to that resource that might give you some thoughts and ideas about potential strategies here. And then a couple of other resources to mention to you that you may be worth your time to check out. On the Atlas website is a resource about building strong enrollment. And full disclosure, this particular resource was originally started and developed before the pandemic, so we do know that things have shifted. However, a lot of what is there in terms of guidance and recommendations and things to think about is still very much applicable. So we encourage you to check out that resource. And then COABE, which hopefully you know is our national adult education membership organization, does have a toolkit that is available for use for adult education programs across the country for marketing purposes, and their kind of tagline is "Move Ahead with Adult Ed." So if you're not aware of that resource, you may want to check that one out. So again, here, we don't have a lot of time for this, but we wanted to mention that I wanted to make sure that you know that Literacy Action Network, as our Minnesota adult education membership organization, LAN does many things, but one of the things that LAN does is to work on producing and supporting our field in the area of marketing. So Kaya, who was one of the presenters on the session that I mentioned a couple slides back, is also serving on the LAN board in membership and marketing. And so this Padlet was created and shared at that presentation at the fall conference. And this Padlet is a place for you all to share any thoughts or ideas that you have for LAN about specific ways that LAN could support you in marketing. I'm going to pause for a second and ask Neil, do you have this Padlet up, and would it be easy for you to click and actually show us that Padlet live? Sweet, nice. Okay, great, thank you. So this is what the Padlet looks like. Astrid has put the link in the chat. We didn't have time last time, but maybe let's just take a second right now to kind of show, if you're not familiar with Padlet, how it could work. So there are currently 3 posts on this Padlet. Those are ideas that folks have shared about things that they would like LAN, to provide or help support. So when you click into this Padlet, you could like any of those posts by clicking on the little heart icon. Yep. Or you could comment on any of those posts if you want to say, oh yeah, and something. Yep. Excellent. And if you'd like to add a different idea, you can do that by clicking on the icon to add a post, and then you type whatever you would like. And your awesome idea, your awesome suggestion, and then you would hit publish. Yeah, great. So I see it. Yeah, see you've got some other folks in there. So excellent. So at this point, I think we're going to give you about, a minute or two. If you have any thoughts or resources around marketing, you could share those in the chat. We invite you to take a moment and add things to this Padlet, or like or comment on things that are currently here. And great, thank you to those of you who are already doing that. That's really excellent. So if you want to click back to the slideshow, Neil, that will be fine. At this point, I think we're going to transition into some different content, but before we'll do that, I'll just pause. Astrid, do you see anything in the chat specifically that we need to focus on, or are we ready to move on to our next topic?
I'm not seeing any questions that we need to address right now. Just lots of great discussion. I want to remind people at the end of the meeting, if you'd like to save the chat so you can go back and glean all of the excellent ideas and resources that are being shared, you can do that by clicking on the 3 dots that are near your to button in the chat box, and you can click on Save Chat. So that'll be a great way to capture all of the excellent suggestions in the chat. So again, thank you all so much for, as Jody said, being a wonderful community of colleagues and being so willing to share your ideas and resources with everyone.
Yeah, so I think at this point, we're going to move on, and I will turn it over to Julie on the next slide.
All right, thank you, Jody. I just have a few updates around transitions, and then I'm going to turn it over for a little more in-depth look at some innovative work that has been happening in the Northwest, and a project that recently got a little bit of national attention. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention to people that this map has been updated. You can find it on the Minnesota Department of Education website, and it's been updated to reflect the current ABE consortia boundaries. There were some changes that had been made previously to the boundaries that the map did not reflect. They should all be current. So if you go to that site, please check to make sure there aren't any issues that you notice around the consortium boundaries. It also will give you workforce development area boundaries and Perkins consortia. This really is a great resource. It's a helpful collaboration tool that assists in just understanding the geographic boundaries of consortia and then the other partner entities that we work with. And I will be doing some training on using it and what it can be used for, and how it might be helpful in completing like the federal competitive grant in the future. But I just wanted to make people aware of that so they can check it out. The next announcement I wanted to make is is regarding the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act state plan. Some of you are familiar with this, many of you probably are not, but this is what guides our work at the state level under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We have to submit a new plan this year, but it's going to be, the goals will remain the same as they have in the other years. And the goals are very much focused on equity and doing a better job working with employers. I think the COVID pandemic kind of pointed out that we need to do a lot more work around equity. So we have chosen to keep those goals as the statewide goals. It actually describes how the core programs have to work together. ABE is a core program. We are Title II. Next slide, please. So some of you, I know you're just dying to read all of the national state WIOA plans, but if you're curious as to what other states are doing, this is public information and anyone can access these plans. And there's a link on how you can access those plans. What might be more interesting to ABE managers or others in the field is program performance. And so when you report all your performance to the state, we then in turn have to report that federally at the federal level. And you can find what that statewide data looks like at the link provided here. And we have to report that in partnership with our other WIOA partners, Title I, II, 3, and 4. And that's it for the updates. Then next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Russ Frankel, who is a Regional Transitions Coordinator in the Northwest, and Leslie Blicker, who is a consultant. And they have been doing some very innovative work, which has involved many of you. And they have a toolkit that they would like to discuss and promote. So I'll turn it over to you, Russ and Leslie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie. And I just want to indicate to the group that it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And I'm also delighted to co-present here today with Leslie Blicker, who's been amazing to work with on this project. This particular project grew from the Northwest region. We're proud of that in the Northwest region. And it has sort of evolved outward to the rest of the state. And so we're here to tell you a little bit more about that really incredible evolution. And Leslie, I didn't get a chance to talk with Leslie about introducing herself, but maybe Leslie, if at this time you could come on board and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Julie for having Russ and myself here to discuss this important work that we're working on. I retired from the Minnesota state system 2 years ago, and I met Russ on my last day of work there, but and we formed kind of this partnership. Excuse me, but I had been doing a lot of system level implementation of projects, kind of change management projects, particularly in the e-learning and online learning realm, but my work covered all kinds of projects related to all of the 37 institutions in the MnSCU or Minnesota State System. I'm also a faculty member at Metro State. I've been teaching for 21 years, so I understand the faculty perspective. I'll leave it at that. I'm mostly retired, but I am doing some part-time consulting, and it's been a pleasure to be working on this project with everyone who I've been meeting along the way.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And the group may not know that I'm also involved with the Minnesota State system, have been for about a dozen years. I work for a center for information technology. And that was where I met Leslie. And that too provides me with some unique insights about the system, and also really some relationships that sort of are, I think, of assistance to us as we kind of have gone about this work. So next slide, please. Wonderful. So I've talked a little bit about the origination of the work, but you're going to see that where we're going today is we're going to talk about this affinity group that we formed, Leslie and I formed, where partnerships exist throughout the state, so that you can look in on that and see if you're on that list. And if you're not, we're going to ask to let us know about that. Resources becoming available through this toolkit that's nearing completion, and the work planned for this year, because this is our second year of this kind of more statewide work. Next slide, please. So what is the work that we're doing? The work that we're doing, really, if you take a look at this word cloud, it's really about work that adult basic education is very familiar with and is at the core sort of mission of adult basic ed, and that is really student success. We have a number of students in the Minnesota State system that are, in need of support, certain levels of support, to be able to have success in the college system. And so this ability for us to work as systems together really kind of gets at the core of our strengths of each of the systems, where we partner together to ensure that students are retained in developmental education courses through the end of that particular course, and their ability to move through that particular coursework is as expedient as possible, and that they have the core foundation of success, successful elements around competence and confidence to really succeed in college. Next slide, please. So what's happened? So we've met with partnership instructors, administrators, managers, and state officials, really, and we continue to do that work as a way for us to scale and expand and improve partnership processes and partnership practices with our two systems, our two systems. We've identified barriers, and there are barriers. You all know that about barriers, but we're really equally interested in what are the best practices for the most successful partnerships, and we've discovered many of them. You can read the rest of this, but I think what we're really trying to get at is we have discovered this really incredible hunger for sharing the practices. And when I talk about sharing this hunger, what's really cool to share with you is that this hunger exists on the Min-State side as well as the adult basic education side. And for me, in a bit, that's a bit unique in the sense that we have found something in which there are a number of practitioners, and I will tell you that there's about 90 practitioners equally divided between the Min-State system and the ABE system that desire to work together on behalf of students. And so that led to the forming of this affinity group where we could be together throughout the course of the academic year and spend time exploring best practices and really getting to know each other and not feel like there's this isolation around this kind of partnership work. What that led to is this development of a toolkit. The affinity group was loud and clear. They said to us, there are a number of good things going on, but for us to maybe get better at this work, it would be great to have some tips and tricks for doing that, and some really sound practices around what is good collaboration look like? What does it feel like? Next slide, please. Okay, so many of you know that another impetus for this work was that the Minnesota state system in 2017 went about the business of this developmental education strategic roadmap. It was in response to the legislature who basically said, we want to see some reform. Please, you're going to report back to us. There was no please about it. It was like you were expected to report back to us in 2021 regarding your outcomes of revising and transforming this work. And you may recall, some of you, that there is mention of adult basic education in this strategic roadmap. And it was at this time that the Northwest region said, this is really a great time to strike. It's really a great time for us to reveal and express to the in-state campuses in the Northwest that we stand ready and we're interested to proactively work with you on ways that we could partner to address student needs. Next slide, please. All right, so about 18 months ago, we discovered the statewide hunger, as I mentioned, for sharing practices. And this led to the forming of an affinity group with 90+ members. We continue to add members. We've had a number of MnState in particular, folks who have joined us this year. And these roles, I just share with you that these roles are a number of faculty members, staff, which are primarily deans that are responsible for developmental education. We have some system-wide folks from the MnState side, and we also have on the ABE side administrators, instructors, and system leaders. So it's a powerful group, and we just love working with them. Next slide, please. All right. Now, let me think about this. I think, Leslie, this is where I turn it over to you. Is that correct?
Not quite, but I'm happy to do it. I think
All
you
right.
only have a couple slides left. So
all right, I got a couple more. I'm going to continue on. Thank you so much, Leslie, for the help. All right, so this particular affinity group doesn't advise upward to anyone. It's collegial and lateral in influence. It's completely voluntary. And that's the cool part of it, is people really desire to be part of this. The meetings focus on sharing of information, resources, best practices. As you can see, it's informal in nature, although there is this really strong relationship that we've cultivated with system leadership at Minnesota State, colleges and universities, and the MDE ABE unit. And we are super appreciative of those relationships, which of course is the reason why we're here today presenting to you, is that because of that great support that we're receiving from the unit. We keep, a membership list, and you're soon gonna find out that we have an Atlas web page or web pages for the toolkit, and so the support has been amazing. Next slide, please. Okay, yes. So what does these affinity group meetings look like? Last year, there were 4 of them. They're an hour and 15 minutes in length. We've had presentations from successful partnerships. We want to express our deep appreciation to the Northwest Service Cooperative and Northland College, and our also Metro North ABE and Anoka Ramsey Community College Partnership. Just amazing partnerships where we've been able to demonstrate that there are incredible outcomes, really measurable outcomes in relation to student success. This year, we have 5 meetings scheduled. They're 75 minutes each. In fact, this week, on the 18th and 19th, we have our session 2. They're offered twice. It's the same topics, but it's just allows us to get more folks involved And of course, recordings are available for anyone that has an interest in the information or wasn't able to attend either of the 2 sessions. Next slide, please. Okay, the benefits. As you can see, you can kind of read this on your own. For members, it's really this chance of really learning from your peers. As I mentioned earlier, you're not feeling perhaps as isolated in this work. You recognize that there's a lot of great things going on. And of course, birds of a feather flock together. It's this notion that, hey, we're having some trials and there's some things that are difficult, and let's learn from each other about how do you surmount those difficulties. For our work, Leslie and I will say, hey, it provides this really great guidance in terms of how we should proceed, what kinds of topics should we talk about, and really how can we work with the system leadership to support these efforts. All right, and I think the next slide would be great. Okay, I know that now we're getting close to Leslie's time. We want to make sure that if you're, well, first of all, if you're involved within the affinity group at this stage and you're participating, if in chat you could just state your name and your school district or your consortia, that would be great. I think it would be great for your peers to see how many of you are engaged in this effort thus far. Furthermore, I'd like to end my portion by inviting you to contact me if you have an interest in learning more about the group. And certainly there's an opportunity for you to join the group. We have 4 more sessions of meetings coming up. They occur in November, January, March, and April. All right, Leslie, it's all yours.
Well, thanks very much, Russ. I think you did a great job. I have a handful of slides, and maybe we'll take another 6 or 7 minutes to go through some of the resources that we've been putting together this year. I did want to mention that I put the link for the affinity group information in the chat, but also, as Russ said, if you're interested in joining, please contact him, because there's a set of procedures we do. He gets you enrolled, sends me a message, I get you access. Now that I put the link to the website, it's only those who have access to the website can have it. So that's why it's important to contact Russ first. Okay. The next 2 slides, this is kind of the interactive portion. If those of you, well, I've noticed in the participant list that many of you, several of you are involved in the affinity group, and several of you have also been involved in some partnerships together with your area campus, Minnesota State campus. What we're trying to do is document how many partnerships there are throughout the state. When we started, we knew of a handful, and we particularly knew the ones in the Northwest region. We're up to 18 or 19. These slides show 18. There are 2 slides. So the reason it's interactive is please make note here. Of course, the Minnesota State College is listed first, and then the ABE region or ABE program is listed next. And if you could toggle between the 2 slides, make note if you're on here, which is fine. But if you're not on here and you believe that your ABE program does have a partnership, please type it into the chat along with the college that you're working for. So the first assignment is, if you're not on the list, let us know in the chat. The second assignment is, if you're not on the list at all and you don't have a partnership, just make a mental note, because we're going to ask you another question at the very end of the slides. So that's it. Next slide altogether. Thank you for toggling. Great. So yeah, okay. I'm looking at the chat too. As Russ mentioned, the marching orders really from the affinity group last year, as well as the Northwest region, was we could all benefit by having a resource, what we're calling the toolkit. And I know Russ used the word, it's fine, tips and tricks. I think it's it's more like a roadmap, and I hate to call it a manual, but for people who are looking to get started, it's chock full of information. And just so you know, presently, it's a very hefty document. I'll tell you in a minute how we formed it, how we were able to write it. But the notion was we develop it as a useful resource to help train and support other folks who wanted to come, form a partnership. While we're developing it specifically for folks in Minnesota, we think it will have value as well nationally. We did research to see if there were other forms of toolkits specifically for adult ed or adult basic ed along with their community colleges. And I did not find anything that really resembles this. The iBest model is the closest that we found, but we think that this will certainly have some use for people far and wide. So next slide, please. And you can read through this. The intended audience, really the last bullet about says it all. Anyone with developmental education, reporting responsibility, or who is charged with measuring outcomes. I mean, it has to almost be the campus and some leadership there that would say, sure, we are going to partner our dev ed faculty or find the faculty because we have some excellent ABE educators who are willing to come and to do the partnering. What we're not talking about today, but if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer in the chat, is what exactly does a partnership look like? The toolkit does have that, and we've formed a model that we call where it starts at typically at light integration, where ABE will work with the college for some support services, maybe the wraparound services. They may or may not be co-located on the campus. Students may or may not have to come to a separate office, but all the way this continuum to very high level of integration where there is co-location. The ABE staff instructors are embedded into the department and they're using a true co-teaching model. So the toolkit has those kinds of things. How do you get started? Who do you find? How do you finance it? What do the integration models look like? Which classes lend themselves the best for this type of partnership? But the intended audience would be all of these folks here. And one of our questions we'll have for you at the end of this is, how do you think we best get the toolkit in the hands of people so they'll actually use it and utilize it? Next slide, please. The 4 chapters, I won't go through a lot of detail, but there was enough content that we really needed to break it down into chapters. Chapter 2 is the longest at this point. What I was going to say is presently it's in a PDF file. That's not the end game. The end game is to have a web presence that makes it particularly user-friendly for people to go in and almost have a menu and an a la carte ability, or an ability to select things a la carte. So that if you've already have an initial partnership going, but you want to learn more about how others are doing it or hear other stories, you could go right to chapter 4. So we're going to do kind of like what might be an executive summary of each of the chapters in the website and with useful resources, and then give you a link to the entire chapter, give people a link to the entire, toolkit if they want to. So next slide. So how did we build this toolkit? Well, we worked through the affinity group and we had subject matter experts there. I knew that I was going to be able to do what I call a sandwich, sort of the 20,000 foot level examination of what's happening nationwide for dev ed reform, as well as where, what different states are doing, and then what does this dev ed ABE model look like. But when it got into the real meat of how does it work? What does it look like? What were the success stories like? Where were your barriers and how did you overcome them? We went to a number of folks and basically there were 5 partnership teams that worked very hard over the summer to contribute information. Some of you are here, Patrick Hobart, who just typed into the chat, in the Metro North ABE with Anoka Ramsey, they contributed. Kirsten Fugelseth, along with her team, they contributed, and so forth. So we're very grateful to them. And next slide, please. Where can you find it? And I will, give me 1 second. Here's the link. I'll put it in the chat. Give me a second to get it to everyone. There you go. So Russ and I took meetings with MDE this summer, and they suggested that Atlas might be a good place for us to post the toolkit and our resources. And again, we've been working with folks there and very, very grateful for that. Right now, all you'll find is the PDF. By the end of the year, I think you will see a much more useful and interactive toolkit that will look similar to what I described a few minutes ago. Next slide. So what are we doing next? Well, we definitely want to roll out the toolkit. You know, as for anyone who's had experience putting together a toolkit, a strategic plan, any kind of policy document, you don't want it to be this thing that sits on the shelf. You want it to be organic and you want people to use it. So Russ and I are trying to present at different places and ask, what's your best recommendations for strategies for its use? Particularly, you know, if you have a partnership, but you think that there's some additional folks within your own program or within your neighboring college, let us know. And we will continue to present. We hope to put together a mentoring concept, meaning not a full-on program, but if there are new instances of partnerships that would like to form, okay, so partners who would like to form, that we think we can match you up with some existing partners, either close by or that feel somewhat similar to what you're trying to do. And then we hope to add some additional resources that would be short video clips and testimonials from students and faculty. And the big one, next slide, measuring outcomes. Okay, so Russ and I mean, this came from the Northwest region, of course, initially, is how can we best measure these partnerships? We know they tell a good story, and we have lots of anecdotal information that students are succeeding. They're getting into their credit-bearing courses faster. At least they're passing their DevEd courses when there's a partnership present in higher rates. Their pre and post testing results have gone up. The question is could we, when we are documenting all these 19 partnerships or 18 partnerships, somehow encourage the partnerships to utilize a common data set? And we have more than toyed around, but we have drafted a common data set that we think could be used that goes beyond measuring success in a single class. We're really wanting to follow the student throughout their program. So next slide, please. We know that we have to be, there should be more rigorous data collection, not only in terms of how it's collected, but the type of data. So the bullets here are the kinds of things we're looking at next. So this year, we're going to have discussions about how is it possible that these partnerships could implement such a data set. And I think that's it. Next slide. Okay. And that's the end of my section. Russ, I'm going to turn it back over to you. We've got we might want to check in with Julie about how much time we have, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, 5 minutes perhaps, for questions and comments. I'll look at the chat as Russ is facilitating this section. Okay, and then, you know, that question about if you didn't see your ABE program listed earlier and you're interested in getting started, then please type into the chat at this point in time, and then we'll make sure we capture that. So thanks a lot, Russ. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Leslie, thanks so much. Well done. I did want to comment that we did have a few folks indicate that they have partnerships, and we'll make sure that you're on the list and that we're making contact with you regarding your work. So thank you so much. Julie, yes, I think it's a good idea for us to do a time check with you and make sure that we're kind of aware of what kind of time we have left.
Yeah, we're kind of at time, but maybe if you wanna throw out your questions and people can reply in the chat if they have time over break, and we could leave it at that. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. Did we have another slide here or do we need to go back? Okay, there we are. Okay, so essentially the question we have that folks could put into chat would be, when you think about the toolkit, and I know some of you are, ill-equipped, you haven't seen it, so I don't really know, but keep in mind, it's going to be on the Atlas site. It'll be in a form that is viewable there and digestible there. When you think about your partnerships and your relationships with folks in your area, how can we maximize the use of the toolkit? So that's pure and simple it. So if you have some thoughts on that, please put it in the chat or just email me if you have some thoughts on that. We want to thank you for your time today. We want to thank the ABE unit and the folks leading our state in that area for bringing this forward with you and for us to have this opportunity to engage with you today. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Leslie and Russ. And we very much appreciate the work you've been doing on this. It's a perfect timing to really move the bar with ABE and developmental education. I believe we're going to move to our next break. And it looks like Neil has already got that going for us. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
Information so far. Let's go on to our next section. And let's talk a little bit about grants and accountability. On this next slide here, you can see our Minnesota adult education statewide outcomes. These are the 5 major WIOA or Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act indicators: measurable skill gain, employed at 6 months, employed 1 year, median quarterly earnings, and credential rate. Also, before we even get into those, you can see that, not surprising, our total statewide participant rate went down from just over 30,000 to just over 20,000. Not surprising with everything that was going on with COVID and all the disruptions we had last year. You'll also know that out of those 5 indicators of measurable skill gain, employment, earnings, and credential rate, we did meet 2 out of the 5 indicators. And Astrid has shared in the chat the link to our mnabe.org website, where you can actually download the full report if you want to look more in depth at the more detailed statistics. And while it's true that we didn't meet 3 out of the 5 indicators, let's just be honest, these numbers don't tell the full story about everything that we did, about all of the hard work that you put in, about all of the challenges that you and the and all of the instructors and all of us faced and addressed last year. And so I just want us to not make sure that we overemphasize this nor minimize this, right? Like, let's just acknowledge that these are 5 numbers that the feds will be very interested in looking at our statewide system. But just like every other system in every other state in the nation, they were highly affected by everything that we went through last year. And honestly, I think we did overall fairly well. The fact that we only dropped 13 percentage points from 2020 to 2021 says a lot about the hard work that all of you did to try to test and post-test those that were able to make it, or to help those that needed a diploma earn a diploma, or to make sure that maybe for making sure that it was documented if they left your system and went to post-secondary afterwards. So I think there are a lot of successes in here, and we know there's a lot more stories and a lot more behind these numbers that's truly valuable as we work with one another. So please, let's not take this as something that we could have done better on, or that we didn't do well. I think we did fairly well considering everything. And I'm acknowledging that our students are getting employed above our federal targets, and that their earnings are above our federal targets as well. Like, just that we met a couple of those indicators is a great success, and we should make sure that we're acknowledging that. And we will have some of these statistics available for you at the consortium level, but we'll talk about some of that later as we prep for that federal competition. Let's go to the next slide. We also wanted to let you know, remind you about that contact hour reporting working group recommendation, where consortia for the July 2022 application that you will submit a table A and a table A1. That we are still hoping that is what gets implemented. We're still working with the Minnesota Department of Education finance team, government relations team, and the executive team to make sure that we all agree that we can go forward and implement that. And right now we're working primarily with the government relations team about that legal justification. And so Jody and I are going through that process right now. And it's just taking a little longer than we anticipated. No big hiccups, just it takes a little bit of time. So stay tuned and we'll communicate with you as we have a resolution to that issue. At this point then, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Jody.
All right, thanks, Brad. So just a couple of reminders about grant and financial things. For those of you who are the manager for the fiscal agent entity of your consortium or for the entire consortium, just a heads up and a reminder that the final fiscal completion report for fiscal year 21 funds is due to our office in a couple of weeks, December 15th. You should have received a blank copy of that report via email from Neil this year. And that came to you, I believe, sort of at the end of October. Please keep in mind, I know some of you have submitted it, which is great that you are working ahead, but I also want to give you a little bit of a caution that you need to make sure that what you submit on this report matches what is in the audit certified UFARS report that your district submits to MDE for all of the education funding and I believe that's usually submitted in December. So part of the reason why we used to have this report due to our office earlier, and part of the reason we bumped it back to December 15th in the last couple of years is to make sure that you have enough time to ensure that what you report on this report matches what's in your audit certified UFARS report from your district. And in general, this report shouldn't be problematic except that we have this special feature of adult education funding that you are allowed to carry over 20% of state funds into the first quarter of the following fiscal year. So just know that if you have done that this year, if you used up any remaining fiscal year 21 funds between July 1st and September 30th, that is great. And we're glad you did that, but you need to be sure to report it correctly. And you need to be sure that it is course coded in the UFAR system correctly. And for this year, the correct code for that is 001. So any questions about that you have or that the person in your business office has, because often the folks in your business office do not understand this nuance of adult ed funding. Any questions that you have about that, please reach out to me and I'm happy to talk through it more with you and also with the business office staff if that's helpful. And then another reminder on the next slide, we just wanted to briefly touch on some details we've finally been able to work out around this additional ABE funding that we have one time this year. Thank you to all of you for the work that you put in, filling out an application, making a budget for those forms. We know it's great to have additional funding, and we know that it also in some ways creates more work for everyone, right? So what's happening on our end at MDE is the grants and finance staff have far more money to distribute now than they did a year ago because of all this COVID relief funds, and they don't have any more staff to do it. So it's been really hard, and we apologize that many of you have reached out with questions about this pot of funding and about allowable uses and unallowable uses. It's been tricky for us to get answers to those questions because this is new money, it's different money. It came from the federal government to the state, but then the governor has some discretion. So there's some big questions about who decides what can and can't be done with these funds. But here's a couple of things that we've figured out. We know a few of you had asked questions about using it for construction. And Brad and I were originally working towards making sure or working towards getting that approved. And we were hopeful that that could be an allowable use, but final word has come down from Andre at MDE, who is the finance director, that in fact, according to federal guidelines, this funding cannot be used for construction. So that's UFAR's code 520. So we're sorry that I know is unfortunate news for some of you. But that is sort of the official word, the official authoritative word. And then just another kind of detail that we had to work out is that this funding in UFAR's in terms of that FIN code is FIN 166, but then we realized we needed a new code for those of you who are the fiscal agent entity, but then you pass on some of these funds to a downstream provider, to another district or a CBO. So we did finally manage to get the UFARS folks to add a FIN code to allow you to pass on that funding downstream to additional providers in your consortium without it looking like you were double spending those funds, which would have been a problem. So that downstream code is FIN code 665. So please
just
continue.
to clarify about that the fiscal agent is FIN 665, it would be the downstream provider that would record this funding incoming, not as 166 funding, but as 665. So a good example, if we use the Metro East Consortium, North St. Paul, Maplewood, they would take in this money and count it as 166 funding, and then they would pass it out via UFAR's object code to some of their grantees. And let's just use SCRED as another example, as one of the downstream funders. And so SCRED, when they take in this money, they won't record it as 166 FIN code. The downstream funding provider would actually record this money as FIN 665. Very similar to how our federal ABE money has two different codes. The downstream provider uses a different code than 438, which is what the fiscal agent uses.
Yep. Thank you, Brad. That makes a lot of sense. So, right, more relevant information if you are one of those downstream providers, and similar to how you use a different code to code expenditures to your regular state and federal funds when you are a downstream provider. Yep. Thank you, Brad.
And so we had a question from Tom. So the fiscal agent will record all the downstream funding under the one code. Just to clarify, I'm not quite sure what you're asking there, but the fiscal agent in St. Paul is St. Paul Public Schools. St. Paul will record all of this money coming in as FIN 1 financial code 166. And then when they pass it on to other subgrantees or other providers within the consortium, they'll use an object code to pass that money down. And there's two different object codes depending on how much money that they're sending down. And then once, let's say, one of the subgrantees or one of the providers within the St. Paul consortium, when they receive it, let's say like Neighborhood House or Literacy Minnesota or Hmong Cultural Center, they would record that funding not as those CBOs would record that funding not as FIN 166 funding, but actually FIN 665 funding. So that FIN 665 would be used by the downstream provider, like by SCRED, by Hmong Cultural Center, by any of the downstream providers within the consortium. The fiscal agent would not use FIN 665, but will continue to use 166.
So Brad, what I was trying to ask, and maybe I wasn't very clear, is I'm assuming the fiscal agent has to report back to the state how the funding was spent at the end of the year.
Yep.
So that was my question. Do they use one of those codes to show all the money that went to downstream providers was spent under this one code, or do you want it? Will it all have to be broken out by UFAR code, specifically what each downstream provider did with it?
So the fiscal agent will record. They don't record where they pass it off. They will pass it off using it's 166 money that they're sending out, and then the way it's sent out is whatever that UFAR's object code is forwarding. I want to say it's 304 or something like that, but I can't remember. But they'll use that code to talk about how they're passing it on. And they will not, St. Paul Public Schools will never use the FIN 665 to talk about how they're spending the money or what they did. And those reports from St. Paul Public Schools will just talk about how FIN 166 funding was spent. And then all the downstream providers, all of their reports would be listed as 665 reports. I don't know. I feel like we're still not fully maybe saying.
Yeah, so I think for the sake of time, and I see Karen, I do see your question in the chat. I think this is tricky, right? UFARS is really tricky, and that's really what we're talking about here is how to code things in UFARS. So Brad, how about that you and I agree that we will try to put together a little better guidance on this in writing and send it out to our fiscal agent email list, because I also want to recognize there's some folks on this listening right now for whom this doesn't matter at all. So
absolutely.
Sound good?
Yep. So we will, stay tuned. We'll send an email with some additional information about this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jody. Thanks everyone for the questions.
Thank you.
And let's go to the next slide. So we also wanted to let folks know if there that we've had some questions about how can complaints be raised or how can we raise issues within the system. And we just wanted to let you know that if you have any complaints or issues to raise, that you can reach out to me or any other member of our adult education team at MDE through email or phone. I will fully admit, for me, the best way to reach me and get issues started is via phone call. And my phone number and email are on the screen here. What we also want to clarify about issues of discrimination. Issues or incidents of discrimination can be reported to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. They are designated within the state to investigate and document these any incidents of discrimination. And for folks that are curious about that process, you can find more information about the Minnesota Department of Human Rights discrimination complaint intake process on their website. And you can see that link on the screen there. And maybe Astrid, if you could also just share that link in the chat, that would be helpful. We wanted to make sure folks are aware. And what we do when we receive complaints is we try to document all of the notes, and then we might reach out to others just to confirm or clarify some of that information, or just to kind of get multiple perspectives as we go forward. And then we'll share that with our executive team here at MDE or others as appropriate. Let's go to the next slide. We also wanted to talk about the federal grant competition, and this is for our federal ABE money and our integrated English literacy and civics education funding. So if any consortium or any ILCE potential grantee wants to receive that funding, you must apply when the application is posted and before the due date. And then it's also important to know that in the application, we will have one additional requirement that we did not have in 2017, and that's any provider within a grant that could be an ABE program receiving federal funding through a consortium. For example, they must be identified and must be able to document past evidence of past effectiveness of their work in terms of measurable skill gain, employment gains, and other types of WIOA indicators. And those can be both statistical and anecdotal evidence. But we'll have more information about that when we actually talk about the application. And let's go to the next slide. Speaking of which, we do have the grant application workshop that will be coming in soon, but we hit a little bit of a hiccup. We're hoping to be able to have that virtual grant workshop December 8th, 2021, this year, December 8th. Unfortunately, we are not able to have that virtual grant workshop on that date. We're going to be postponing the workshop until January as we work with our grants application team, our grants team, in order to get the application posted. We still plan to have the application posted in December, and we will be emailing out widely and announcing the application is posted when it is posted and available. And then at that point, when the application is posted, we will have the date announced for the virtual grant workshop, which we're anticipating to take place in January. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We had with some of the information that Meg had asked for before. Meg was asking about how we're tracking longitudinal educational data. And the entity that does this, or the system that does this, is called SLEDS, Statewide Longitudinal Education Data Systems. And so that system has a lot of information that connects K-12 data, adult education data, Department of Corrections data, human services data, DEED, employment and economic development data. It combines a lot of our statewide systems, post-secondary data, and we can create longitudinal studies and longitudinal reports. And for the first time ever, we're going to have an adult education specific SLEDS reports, a set of SLEDS reports that will be available. And so that means Reports Reach Consortium will include activity about your adult education students before they came to your program, while they were in your program, and after attending your adult education program. And you'll be able to compare your consortium or your work and outcomes compared to like statewide outcomes and data. And those reports will be accessed through our Department of Education EDIM system, EDIAM. Don't even know what EDIM stands for, but that EDIM system is the same entity that you utilize when you apply for grants through us. So many of you that have gone through that grant application process already do have an EDIM account, and you'll be utilizing that to access some of these reports. We will have a training in early 2022 on how to access and utilize those reports. So stay tuned. We will talk more about that in the future. So, Astrid or Jody, any questions that we need to address verbally right now?
I think we're all set to move forward, Brad.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So let's talk about our next section, and that is our high school equivalency assessments, or what I like to call the high C's across the state of Minnesota. And we do have a new high C's test, and that is the HiSET, which is going to be implemented here in the state of Minnesota. It's been approved, and now we're going to start implementation here soon. Joining me today to give you a brief overview of HiSET is Tanya Haug with the HiSET program through ETS. And now, and you can talk a little bit more about that transition, or you can talk more about that as appropriate, Tanya, but I want to turn it over to you to just share a little bit of information with us on HiSET. Tanya.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad, and everyone that's joining today. My name is Tanya. I'm the National Director for the HiSET program. I'm going to share my slides. If I can do that here. Let's see. Let me share this. There we go. There we go. Okay, so yes, the HiSET exam will be available in Minnesota sometime next year. We're so excited to bring the HiSET exam to your state, and thank you so much for all the work that you all have been doing over the last year and a half or more. We know it's been challenging. We've been working with all of our other states. I think everyone has learned a lot about what's required moving forward. So we are glad that we can bring that knowledge and our appreciation for the work that you do every day. What I'm going to do today is really just give you an overview of the HiSET exam. There's so much detail that I could go into that we just don't have time for today. But over the next couple of months, you will be, you'll have lots of opportunities to ask questions, to attend webinars. Hopefully we'll be able to be there in person soon. So I just want to give you an overview today. So the HiSET exam is 5 subtests that completes the whole HiSET battery. So it's reading and writing are separate, math, science, and social studies. The majority of our tests are multiple choice, and there is one required essay. In Minnesota, you're mostly computer-based, but paper will be offered as an accommodation or as an exception, and there will be more to share about that later. It's of course available in English and Spanish and accommodated test forms, which I will talk about. And you must take the HiSET exam at an official HiSET test center or through the HiSET exam at home option. I'll talk a little bit about both of those things. I know we have a mix today of adult ed programs and test centers. So as I mentioned, the HiSET exam is 5 subtests. You'll see here, it's a total of about 7 hours that's allowed. Multiple choice for every test except for writing. There is one essay that must be completed. You'll see here we have the timeframes for each individual subtest. For reading, there's a little bit extra time for the Spanish version because with the translation to Spanish, there's actually just more words that are required. So we do allow a little bit of extra time. You will get to learn a lot more about the HiSET exam through the Test at a Glance document, which I'll briefly review too. So I mentioned the HiSET exam at home option. We brought this to our test takers during the pandemic and in response to having not availability of test centers and people that were compromised that really could not go outside. So we have the HiSET exam at home available for them to take from home or another secure location. There's of course a set of requirements that need to be met, including eligibility. But one of the great things is that it's available 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so in response to how popular it's been, we've decided to keep it on as a permanent option because we have so many people in our adult ed population that are working multiple jobs or just don't have normal schedules. And so having this as an option has been really, really well received. So we're going to keep it around. Of course, we do have testing accommodations for those with disabilities. This is just a really brief overview of the types of accommodations we have. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but it's really the more typical types of accommodations that you would imagine: extended time, a separate room, an audio version, large print, screen magnification, a scribe if you need one available, sign language interpreted instructions, Braille, refreshable Braille, which is really exciting, and of course a reader or a screen reader. The process to actually get access to the accommodated forms is pretty quick and easy. So what we do suggest is that if you have any test takers that you anticipate will need an accommodation, there's no reason for them not to go ahead and try to get approval for those. The sooner the better. You can't register for an accommodated test form without having prior approval. There are a few exceptions. So we really do recommend that if you have a test taker that needs accommodations, that they apply early. And the process is pretty simple. You'll want to review the test taker bulletin, or the test taker will want to review it, and if they have an advocate as well. Reach out to Disability Services if you have any questions about the process, and also determine what types of accommodations might be needed. You'll want to complete the testing accommodations request form and gather all of that supporting documentation. We really do anticipate that with our population, and this is true for all of our states, that you're going to have test takers who perhaps don't have formal documentation. So depending on the type of accommodation that's being requested, we do also take letters from adult educators of these test takers to help reinforce that they will actually do better with the type of accommodation that they're requesting. So keep that in mind. You want to complete the form, submit it, and then keep in mind that Disability Services, who does a review for approval, might actually need more documentation, or they might have questions. That is completely dependent on what is provided in the actual request itself. But once all the documentation has been provided and approval is there, the test taker will get an accommodations letter with instructions for registration. It's really important to follow those instructions. And then we will actually coordinate with the test center on behalf of the test taker to make sure that the accommodation is available in their preferred test center. And if not, we will work to find one that can accommodate them. All of this information is available in the test taker bulletin and on our website. I will share a copy of this deck, and that way all of the links will be active and you can go straight to the appropriate place that you're looking for. It's a lot of information. So to pass the HiSET exam, we have a different scoring process. So you do need to score at least an 8 on an individual subtest to pass that subtest. For the writing subtest, you do need to earn a 2 on that essay out of, to reach that 8. But as a whole, for the HiSET battery, you do need to earn a 45. So you will need to have some subtests that you perform better than an 8 at. We do also have a college and career readiness score. So that's for test takers that score at a 15 or above. And if they're taking the writing exam, they do need to score a 4 on that essay instead of a 2. This just really does reinforce that they are at a college ready, college and career ready level. If you want to take a preview of our HiSET reports that are available to the test taker through their HiSET profile, you can go to these links. We've got a copy of the subtest score report, And then there's also a comprehensive score report. That comprehensive score report will reflect the highest score that the test taker has on any particular subtest. And of course, keep in mind the official state credential and transcript are issued by the state. I mentioned this test taker bulletin. It's a really helpful for not only the test taker to review it, but also for any of their advocates or adult educators that they might be working with. So I know that includes you. So if you get a chance, please give it a flip through. And if you have any questions, I will share my contact information at the end of this. Happy to answer any questions you might have. We, of course, have a lot of different resources available for you, most of them free. So if you have a chance, you can look at our HiSET website here. Lots of information. All of these are clickable. And for test takers in particular, you will find there's a lot of information available to them. They can create a HiSET account, and they're welcome to do that now. You can also change the website to Spanish with this language button. Once we have a chance to get all of our Minnesota information loaded into our systems, they will also be able to search for an adult ed center or a test center near them. And of course, they can also sign up for a HiSET newsletter. And this is just an example of what the search function looks like for test centers. For adult ed centers, it looks very similar. Also, we will add the state of Minnesota to our website. And so this states button here with the little plus sign to the left, it's a drop down basically. So for each state, you can actually review the requirements for that state. And we're still working on getting Minnesota added to that, but it will be there soon. I mentioned that your test takers can sign up for a My HiSET account. This is where they can access their scores, where they can schedule appointments, lots of other information that's available there to them. So they're free to actually sign up for that at any time, and they can become familiar with it. So I mentioned the HiSET test at a glance earlier. So the test at a glance really does give you detailed information about what is on each individual subtest. It will tell you by subtest how many questions are there, how long they have for the test, the types of questions, the content categories, and more information about the actual test itself. We do have this available in English and Spanish. And this is just a preview of what some of the sections look like. So for math and English, we do have the college and career readiness standards that are associated with the test itself. That's a really handy information for adult educators, but really important for the test takers to understand what they're being tested on as well. A couple of other things that I think will pique some ears of adult educators out there is we do have a writing response scoring guide that's available for you that provides explanations about how the essays are scored and the rationales. And then we also have examples of scored writing responses. These help give you and your test takers a visual representation of what a 2 looks like. So the baseline of what they need to pass, or what a 3 or a 4 looks like, or the maximum of a 6. And that way, some people are visual learners. I am a visual learner too. And so it's helpful to kind of see, okay, that's what I'm aiming for. I can do that, or here's what I need to work on. So those are available on our website, and they are really helpful and handy to have. The other thing you should become familiar with is the math formula sheet. There are some formulas that are not included on the sheet because it's part of the adult ed standards to actually know those by memory. But we do have them listed here of what's not included. And you can actually see examples of the formula sheets on our website. We get lots of questions about that and the calculator. So in terms of other resources, I'm just going to quickly kind of go through what some of the things are that are available to you. We do have free practice tests. We have study companions. I already mentioned the sample writing responses and the scoring guide. But we also have some things like, are you ready to take the exam? That document actually helps you determine by which practice test your test taker is taking, if they are well prepared or not perhaps as well prepared to take the actual operational exam. It does come in handy to kind of have that. Lots of other information that is available here. And we do have some documents that are very specific to you as an educator. So there's a quick reference guide to our prep materials that are available on our website. That PDF actually has active links to the documents that it mentions. So that comes in really handy. There's a roadmap for instructors about the resources that we have and some other documents that you'll find really handy. All available to download straight from your computer from our website. And then, of course, there are so many other test prep providers that are out there where that is what they focus on, and they're great at it. We partner with many of them, like Essential Ed, New Readers Press, or Aztec Software. There's many of them that are out there that have HiSET information. So if you have any questions about the ones that you are familiar with or become familiar with, just let me know, or you can go straight to our website. So for those of you that might be interested in becoming a HiSET test center, I will suggest that you review the HiSET program manual. This includes all the information that's needed to be a productive and effective HiSET test center. It has all of the requirements and suggestions of how you can be a HiSET test center. If you are already a test center, you probably are already very familiar with all the processes and security requirements that are there. So if you are interested in becoming a HiSET test center, just review that document and you'll need to confirm that you can meet the specifications described in it. You'll need to complete HiSET test center forms, identifying key staff and your contact information, address, things like that. Chief examiners and test administrators will need to complete e-learning for the HiSET exam. All of the existing GED sites are pre-approved. We just need to make sure we go through these processes. There is, of course, additional training and support available to you once we get started on accepting test centers. We do webinars when possible. We come and do in-person, maybe regional or on-site, but you do have access to your own customer service reps for test centers in particular. And it's important to note, we don't have any restrictions on any other kinds of tests that you might be providing if you decide to also bring on the HiSET exam. I'm sure there will be lots of questions about becoming a HiSET test center, and we have lots of time to talk about it. Not today, but in follow-up discussions. So for those of you wondering about HiSET test fees, we do have the 5 subtests. So I know that's different from what you're used to now, but for computer, each subtest is $13.75. There is a $10 test center fee. These fees are, of course, paid for by the test taker. So that's $23.75 per subtest, then times 5. There is of course, the subsidy does apply to the HiSET exam as well. And there is a retest, there's 2 free retests per subtest that is paid for. The test taker will just need to pay the test center fee if they do have to go and retest. And those retest credits are good for 12 months. If you have a test taker who's interested in taking the HiSET exam at home, instead of the $10 test center fee, there's a $17.50 remote proctor fee. Happy to answer more questions about any of the test fees, but just wanted to give you a preview on that. And as promised, here's my contact information. I'll try to put it in the chat as well. You'll see here that my email address is tanya.haug@psionline.com. The HiSET exam was recently just acquired by PSI Services. We're really excited about this and the enhancements that will be coming sometime in the future to our program. But for now, everything is as it is on our website, reflected there. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. I see we've got some things in the chat.
Yep, and we've been addressing all the questions in the chat, so we can reference those. And we will have Tanya and others available as needed from PSI Online and from the HiSET program to tell us a little bit more and answer some additional questions. So one question came in: can you tell us why we would recommend HiSET instead of GED? though that is technical assistance and that's guidance that will be developed. Neil, if you want to take back over on the slides, then we can kind of talk about how some of those ideas will be addressed. Tanya, first, I also just want to say thank you so much. You've been so willing to jump in and do lots of different presentations, so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Absolutely, anytime.
Let's go to the next slide. So just to confirm, now that we have a contract signed to implement HiSET, we will be working with HiSET over the next year to implement this new testing system, talking about setting up test centers, creating policies, providing additional trainings, etc. And we want to communicate to stakeholders. That includes you as adult education programs. That includes potential testers. That includes other like K-12 and other partner entities about this, the high school equivalency assessment options. And we also within Minnesota need to change our MDE credentialing database so that we can process data from HiSET and issue HiSET-based diplomas. So stay tuned. There's a lot more going in, and a lot of this is going to take place in 2022. So there won't be any immediate changes that are needed. So just stay tuned, and we'll provide more training. Let's go to the next slide. One of the entities that will really help us with a lot of this work is the High Seas Advisory Group. They're going to help us identify a lot of the needs in the field and across the state. And this is a group that's going to meet for 1 hour on the third Wednesday of the month. Starting tomorrow is our very first meeting. And you can see that this group will focus on test implementation, communication, professional development, policy, and technical assistance needs. So we've already announced this via email, but let's go to the next slide. And you can see that who this group is that will be addressing all of these issues. So we have a wonderful team of 9 that will be helping to be our advisory group. And thank you to all of you that applied. Excellent work. This group, I'm really excited to work with you a lot more to dive into this, to dive into the needs and to make sure that our high Cs are well navigated. So let's go to the next slide. Also, Melissa Holtstrand from GED and Tanya Haug from HiSET will be part of this group as well as test representatives. And if we go to the next slide, our leadership and support will be provided by Literacy Action Network, the Minnesota Department of Education, and the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Will be kind of leading this group as a triad. So thanks to all of you, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this group evolves. And this group definitely has a big task for the next year. So let's go to the next slide. At this point, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end, but you can continue to put questions in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to Astrid.
Thank you, Brad. We are just about at the end of our time together, but before we go, I want to take just a minute to let you know about some upcoming professional development opportunities. Let's go to the next slide. We have a number of events coming up. Support Services Conference later this week, Volunteer Management Conference at the beginning of December, Language and Literacy Institute. With a slide needs to be updated. That's actually going to be a virtual event this year at the end of January. Looking ahead to February, we have the PELSB approved cultural competency training. So if you or your teachers need that training, it will be offered as a 2-part series again this year. Mark your calendars for our spring statewide conference, which will be on April 22nd, a virtual event, and we're still hoping that we may be able to get it together in person for the South Regional. And ask Jody if you could please put the link to the events calendar in the chat. Scott, the August event, I'm assuming you're talking about Summer Institute, and no, that will be virtual again this year due to scheduling constraints with the St. Cloud Civic Center. Let's go to the next slide. We also have a variety of webinars coming up. Encourage you to check out that events calendar to see registration information, but you'll see we've got ACES, CCRS, Math, Edmentum, One Room Schoolhouse, and a couple more webinars in our administrator webinar series. We're also looking ahead to this late winter, early spring, and every evidence-based reading instruction webinar series. So keep an eye out for that one. Let's Go to the next slide. I also want to let people know to keep an eye out for an application that will be coming out on December 14th. It'll go out in our newsletter and will be available on the Atlas website for a study circle focused on writing. This has been in the works for a couple of years in response to requests for more guidance on teaching writing. We're really excited to be launching this starting in February. It'll be 4 meetings, likely a combination of virtual and face-to-face, depending on the situation. So if you have teachers who are interested in getting some more support around teaching writing, how to work with different types of writing, and how to incorporate writing routines in their classrooms, encourage them to apply. Go to the next slide. Also want to make sure that people are aware of our Minnesota Adult Education PD catalog, which is a place to find out more about different professional development that can be accessed through our support network of supplemental service grants. It's a searchable database housed on the Atlas website. And then linked from that catalog is a spreadsheet of all of the professional development activities that have been scheduled to date for the coming year. So that's a great tool for planning ahead as you think about staff time off and scheduling your own local professional development. And finally, on the next slide, just want to remind folks that we do record most of our professional development and our conferences and house those recordings in playlists on our Minnesota ABE professional development YouTube page. So encourage you to check those out and think about these as a resource for your next staff meeting. This can be a great way to learn together, to watch a recording, and then have some discussion. So hope that you'll take advantage of that. And I will turn things over to Brad to close us out.
Thanks so much, Astrid. Definitely a lot that's happening. The materials for today, including the recording and slides, they'll be posted on our MNABE website on mnabe.org under State ABE presentations. Let's go to the next slide. Our next administrator session or web chat will be on January 12th, 2022 from 1 in the afternoon to 2:30. And on the next slide, just thank you all for participating today. There's been some great conversation in the chat, some great questions have been raised, and it just shows how much of that's going on today. Remember when we used to do these for in person, and now we're compacting everything into shorter chunks here, but thank you all for your participation today. And then we can go to the next slide, and we can stop the recording and open it up for questions.